Welcome. My name is Adrian Marchand, and this is my confession. I used to think silence was elegance. Now I know it is rot. 3 years ago, my house was filled with music, string quartets, champagne laughter, the harmless noise of privilege. Now, even the clocks tick softly, afraid to disturb the dead. My name is Adrian Marchand, and wealth has never bought me peace. The night I lost my wife, the noise of my life ended too. Her name still echoes through these halls, whispered by the staff when they think I cannot hear. Julia. I buried her in white marble, then buried myself in work. But death has its own contagion. My son caught it. Leo was only 6 when she died. One winter morning he simply stopped speaking. No tantrum, no tears. Just a small, soundless boy who looked at the world as if every word might wake something terrible. Doctors called it selective mutism, a trauma response. I called it punishment. Perhaps mine. For 3 years, I have spoken to him, but not with him. Each day I write him letters I never give him, about school, about his mother, about nothing. They sit in a drawer in my study, sealed and pointless. He sits at his little desk, drawing clouds, the kind that never rain. The housekeeper, Mrs. Doran, says the boy needs laughter. The therapist says he needs a gentle female presence. I nodded, though what I really needed was to stop being haunted. So I hired one more governess. The last 3 fled before spring. The agency described her as unconventional but effective. I read her resume once, barely. I only noticed one strange detail. She had declined to list her references. In this world, that is either confidence or hiding. I was too tired to care which. On the morning she arrived, rain dragged down the sky. From my study window, I saw the taxi wind up the long gravel road. Black umbrella, worn suitcase, a woman too young for this sort of post. She stepped out, looked up at the mansion like someone about to enter a legend, then smiled. Actually smiled. I remember thinking, she'll hate it here before sundown. Her name was Elise Rowan. She smelled of books and cold air. She shook my hand firmly, eyes bright, unafraid. I heard you have a quiet house, Mr. Marchand, she said. I prefer it that way. I almost laughed. Prefer it quiet? Then she was perfect. But within an hour, she had broken every rule of my morning. She laughed, really laughed, in the hallway when she saw Leo hiding behind the piano. She sang as she unpacked, a crooked little tune with no melody I could name. The staff froze, scandalized. The sound echoed up the marble staircase, like sunlight spilling where it didn't belong. By evening, the house felt wrong. Alive. I told myself it was irritation, not curiosity, that made me stand outside the nursery door that night. Through the crack I saw her kneeling by Leo's bed, whispering something I couldn't hear. The boy watched her with enormous eyes, unblinking. When she turned, I stepped back before she saw me. Later, as I passed the drawing room, I found something odd. A photograph on the mantel slightly tilted forward. No one touches that frame. It's the last picture of Julia, taken by the lake. Someone had moved it. Or maybe the house had breathed again. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing that laugh. It didn't belong in this mausoleum I called a home, and yet it wasn't unpleasant. I told myself I hired a governess. What walked through my door felt like something else entirely. And for the first time in years, I was afraid, but not of ghosts. The next morning began with laughter again. It started faintly, like birdsong after a storm, drifting through the corridors that hadn't heard joy in years. I was in my study, pretending to read the financial report on my desk, when I realized I was listening to her voice instead of numbers. Elise was in the garden with Leo. Through the tall window, I saw them kneeling in the dirt. She was holding a worm between her fingers, laughing as the boy stared at it with horror and fascination. "He's a gardener, not a monster," she said, her tone playful. Leo's mouth twitched. For a moment, I thought I saw the trace of a smile. Something twisted in my chest. The boy hadn't smiled since Julia's funeral. By noon, Elise had committed every social sin imaginable in this house. She sat at the servants' table. She took tea in the conservatory without asking. And, worst of all, she hummed. Hummed while she walked, while she read, while she cooked. It wasn't even a tune I knew. It sounded old, unfinished, like a lullaby that had forgotten its own ending. When I finally confronted her, she didn't look the least bit intimidated. "Miss Rowan," I said, keeping my tone clipped, "you were hired as an instructor, not a troubadour." She tilted her head, amused. "He listens when I sing. I didn't hire you to entertain him." "No," she said softly. "You hired me to reach him. And I'm trying." There was no arrogance in her voice, only certainty. That, somehow, was worse. I should have dismissed her then. But she stayed. And so did that strange melody. By the third day, Leo followed her everywhere. They had invented a game of shadows, where she would move her hand in the sunlight, and he would copy her shape on the wall. Simple. Innocent. But once, I walked past the nursery and saw them standing still, both staring at the reflection in the mirror. Elise's face was calm. Leo's was not. "What do you see?" she asked him. He didn't answer. He only pointed to the corner of the glass, where a faint smudge curved like a fingerprint. After she left the room, I wiped the mirror myself. The mark didn't come off. That evening, Mrs. Doran came to me, wringing her hands. "Sir, that woman, she talks to the boy about his mother." I looked up sharply. "What did she say?" "Something about dreams," the old woman whispered. "That the dead visit through them. That he can tell his mother anything, and she'll hear." For a long time, I said nothing. I should have been furious, yet a small part of me, the part that still woke at night to the sound of Julia's voice, wondered if Elise was right. Later, I found her in the library, barefoot, perched on the ladder as she arranged books that hadn't been touched in years. She looked down at me with that same infuriating calm. "You're trespassing," I said. "So are you," she replied, smiling faintly. "This isn't living, Mr. Marchand. This is waiting." The words hit harder than I wanted to admit. She climbed down slowly, one hand trailing along the spines of the books as if she were reading them through her fingertips. "I found something in the nursery," she added. "A music box. It's broken." I frowned. "Then throw it away." Her eyes glimmered. "Perhaps some things shouldn't be thrown away, only mended." When she left the room, I opened my desk drawer, the one I hadn't touched in months. Inside lay the music box she'd mentioned. I remembered it now. Julia's lullaby for Leo, the last song she ever played. I wound it once. The melody stuttered, cracked, then stopped. Outside, down the corridor, Elise laughed again. The music box clicked once more, on its own. I didn't sleep that night. The house was no longer quiet. Something had woken up, and I couldn't tell if it was the past or me. Elise had been here only 2 weeks, yet the house no longer obeyed me. The silence I had spent years protecting had turned restless, full of small, human sounds, footsteps, laughter, the rustle of pages. It unnerved me. I began rising early, before the servants, before the sunlight reached the east wing, just to have an hour of stillness. Even then, I could hear her in the garden, humming that nameless tune as she swept dew from the stone path, as if claiming the morning before anyone else could. Leo changed too. He still didn't speak, but his silence had softened. He followed her with a devotion that was neither childish nor obedient. It was trust. I watched from my study window one afternoon as she drew with him on the terrace. They used chalk, pale colors that looked ghostly against the dark marble. Circles, stars, strange shapes I couldn't name. When I asked what they meant, Elise said, "He's learning to talk with colors. Words can frighten him, but colors never lie." Her tone was gentle but guarded, as though she feared I might tear the drawings away. I didn't. I only nodded and left, though something about the shape stayed in my mind long after, especially the red circle drawn beside a black line. It looked disturbingly like the lake. That night, I found one of Leo's sketches on my desk. I hadn't put it there. It showed 3 figures, a woman in a red dress, a small boy, and a man standing apart from them, half erased. My chest tightened. Julia had worn red that night. I had never told Leo. I searched the hallways until I found Elise in the music room, sitting at the piano. The keys were yellowed, untouched since the funeral. Her fingers moved lightly, coaxing a broken tune from the old strings, the same lullaby the music box once played. "Where did you learn that song?" I asked. She didn't look up. "He hummed it." "Leo?" She nodded. "Not words. Just the notes. Children remember what we wish they'd forget." For a moment, I forgot to breathe. I wanted to ask how she knew the melody, how she guessed the one thing Julia used to play every night. But before I could, she said something quietly, almost to herself. "Your wife loved the water, didn't she?" I froze. "Who told you that?" She blinked, realizing what she'd said, and smiled faintly. "Leo draws it often." I only assumed. But I knew she was lying. Her eyes gave her away. After she left, I walked to the lake. The night was still, the water smooth as glass. The air smelled faintly of lilies and old rain. The bench where Julia had sat that evening was still there, warped with time. Someone had placed fresh flowers on it. Wild daisies. Elise's flowers. I stood there until the wind rose, until the reflection of the house in the lake wavered and broke. When I returned inside, Leo's door was slightly open. He was asleep, one hand clutching the broken music box. It played a single, trembling note before falling silent again. I turned to leave, and saw a shadow move across the corridor. A figure slipping into the darkness, light hair glinting briefly before vanishing around the corner. The next morning, I asked the servants if anyone had gone upstairs during the night. They swore no one had. But the faint scent of lilies lingered in the hall. I began to notice small things. A door left open that I was sure I had closed. Footprints near the lake after dawn. The scent of lilies following me through the corridors long after Elise had gone to bed. One morning, I found her in the library again, the same ladder, the same grace. She was dusting the upper shelves, humming that song. It should have annoyed me, but it didn't. It frightened me instead. "Elise," I said, "do you ever sleep?" She laughed softly, descending the ladder. "I sleep when your house does." "Then you must never sleep at all." She smiled at that, sadly, I thought, and brushed the dust from her hands. Perhaps some houses are afraid to dream. There was something in her tone, an echo of recognition, as though she knew too much of what haunted these rooms. That night, while I worked in my study, I heard the music box again. I followed the sound upstairs, expecting to find Leo awake. Instead, I found Elise kneeling beside his bed, winding the box gently between her palms. "How did you repair it?" I asked. She didn't startle. "It was never broken," she said. "Just locked. Some things only open when you speak to them kindly." Her calmness unnerved me more than any defiance could have. After she left, I lifted the box. The tune faltered halfway through, but a whisper followed it, Leo, murmuring something in his sleep. A word I couldn't make out. The next day I sent for a man I knew at the agency, discreetly. "Elise Rowan," I said. "I want her record. All of it." By evening, he called back. His tone was cautious. "She's difficult to trace. Worked under a different name once, Elise Morin. Taught in a small orphanage outside Calais. Closed 4 years ago after an accident. A child drowned in a nearby lake." A lake. My blood ran cold. That night, I confronted her. She was in the drawing room, sketching something by candlelight. "Why didn't you tell me you worked at St. Bridget's?" I asked. She froze. The candle's flame wavered between us. "You looked into my past," she said quietly. "You hid it," I replied. "Why?" Her eyes didn't move from mine. "Because the truth frightens people. And you've had enough of that, haven't you? Don't play games with me, Elise. That orphanage, what happened there?" Her lips parted, but she didn't answer. Instead, she looked toward the window, where the moonlight brushed the curtains like pale fingers. "There was a boy," she said at last. "He stopped speaking after the accident." I couldn't reach him then. I thought maybe I could try again. I stared at her, trying to decide if it was compassion or manipulation in her voice. "You mean Leo?" She didn't deny it. "Children carry the echoes of each other," she murmured. "Sometimes one can heal what another began." I wanted to tell her to leave, to get out before she dug deeper into the ghosts of this house, but I couldn't. Something in her gaze held me there, suspended between suspicion and a strange, reluctant trust. Later, after she'd gone upstairs, I noticed the sketch she'd left behind on the table. It was a portrait, not of Leo, not of Julia, but of me. Only the eyes were missing. The space where they should have been was left blank, as though she hadn't yet decided what kind of man I was. I burned the drawing in the fireplace, but the image stayed. That night, I dreamed of the lake again. This time, a figure stood on the far bank, holding a lantern. I called out her name, but it wasn't Julia who turned. It was Elise. The air in the house changed after that night. The silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was listening. I could feel it, like a breath held between walls. Elise moved quietly through the rooms, as if afraid to disturb the ghosts she had stirred awake. And I, a man who had once ruled empires, found myself tiptoeing around her like a child afraid of breaking something sacred. Leo had grown bolder in her presence. He still didn't speak, but he laughed, soundless at first, like breath escaping in wonder, then in small, broken bursts that caught me off guard. One evening, I found them building towers of books in the library. She called it the architecture of stories. When the towers fell, Leo clapped silently, and Elise grinned at him as though he'd spoken a sonnet. But that night, everything shifted. It was nearly midnight when I heard footsteps on the stairs, light ones, not the deliberate tread of servants. I stepped into the hallway and saw Leo standing there in his nightshirt, the music box pressed against his chest. His eyes were wide, shining in the dark. "What is it, son?" I whispered, afraid to scare him back into silence. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached up, offering the music box. I knelt to take it, and as I did, he leaned closer, lips trembling. For a moment, I thought he might be about to cry. Then, in a voice dry with disuse, he whispered, "She's talking." I froze. The words were fragile, as if they might shatter between us. I wanted to ask who, but the answer was already written in his face. His mother. "She's talking," he said again, louder this time, as if the words themselves had been waiting years to be spoken. Then he pressed the music box to my ear. It wasn't playing. The lid was closed. "Elise," I called hoarsely. My voice sounded strange in my own house. She appeared at the top of the stairs within seconds, wrapped in a shawl, her hair loose around her face. When she saw Leo beside me, her expression softened, but only for a moment. Then something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. Fear. "What did he say?" she asked quietly. I told her. She knelt beside him, brushed a curl from his forehead, and said, "What is she saying, Leo?" He stared at her for a long moment, then whispered, "Come back." Elise's hands trembled. She pulled him into her arms, holding him too tightly for comfort. When she looked up at me, there were tears in her eyes. "It's not unusual," she said quickly. "Children remember differently." But her voice was shaking, and I could tell she didn't believe her own words. After she put him back to bed, I stopped her at the door. "You knew this would happen, didn't you?" Her gaze held mine. "I hoped it would." "Why?" "Because sometimes the dead won't rest until we listen." There was no sleep for me after that. I sat in the study until dawn, staring at the half-burned logs in the fireplace. When the first light touched the room, I saw something glint in the ashes, a piece of paper, half charred. One of my old letters to Leo. I could still read a few words through the scorch marks. Asterisk, forgive me, I was driving that night. Asterisk. I had locked those letters away. Someone had taken them. When I turned, the door to the study was ajar. A faint scent of lilies lingered in the air. Elise's scent. Morning came pale and reluctant, as if the sun itself didn't want to enter my house. I hadn't slept. The burned letter lay on my desk like a wound reopened, edges curled and black. Someone had read what no one should have seen. When Elise came down for breakfast, Leo was already waiting for her, his face bright, his voice still absent but his eyes alive. She ruffled his hair, laughed softly, and for a moment, everything looked normal. Ordinary. Then she looked up and saw me watching. The smile slipped, just slightly. "Who went into my study last night?" I asked. Her gaze didn't waver. "Perhaps you forgot to lock it." "I don't forget." Leo's hand tightened around hers. She looked at him, then back at me. "Maybe the house is tired of your secrets," she said quietly. I wanted to shout, to accuse, but her calmness unnerved me more than guilt would have. She excused herself and took Leo to the garden, leaving me with a silence that burned worse than anger. By noon, I had made up my mind. I went upstairs to her room. It was small, neat, but the air smelled faintly of old paper and lilies. On her bedside table lay a stack of drawings, Leo's mostly. But beneath them I found one of my own letters, unfolded, the ink smudged by a fingerprint. It was the letter I wrote a year after Julia's death. The one that began, asterisk, I was driving that night, and she knew. Asterisk. I felt cold. When I turned, Elise was standing in the doorway. She didn't look surprised. "I didn't steal it," she said. "It was in the music box." "That's impossible." She shook her head. "No. Leo found it there yesterday. He showed me. You must have hidden it long ago." "I would never." I stopped, because I could no longer be sure. Grief had erased whole months from my memory. Perhaps I had hidden it. Perhaps Julia had. "Did you read it?" I asked. "Yes." Her honesty stung more than deceit could have. "Then you know," I said. "I killed her." Elise stepped closer. "No," she said softly. "You lost her." "There's a difference." "You don't understand." "I understand too well," she whispered. "I was there." The words hit me like a blow. "What do you mean, there?" She took a breath, as if deciding whether to finish what she had begun. That night at the lake, I wasn't a stranger. I was walking back from the orphanage. I saw the car. I heard the crash. Her voice faltered. "I pulled your son out of the water before the police came." For a moment, I couldn't speak. My knees went weak. You saved him? She nodded. But I didn't save her. I still hear her voice sometimes. So does he. The room spun. I saw flashes of that night. The rain, the headlights, Julia's hand gripping my arm, the argument, the skid, the scream. I sat down heavily. Why didn't you tell me this when you came here? Would you have let me stay? I didn't answer. She moved toward the window, looking out over the lake that gleamed faintly through the trees. You built this house like a tomb, she said. But the dead don't live here, Adrian. Only we do. And maybe it's time to stop hiding from the truth. Her reflection in the glass looked like Julia for half a heartbeat. It was almost enough to make me believe the impossible, that something of her had sent this woman to us. When Elise turned back, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. There's one more thing you should know, she said. Your wife didn't drown because of the crash. She walked into the water after. I stared at her, unable to move. And for the first time in 3 years, I realized I didn't know what truly happened the night Julia died. For 3 days I avoided her. I told myself it was anger, but it wasn't. It was fear of what else she might say. I stayed in my study, pretending to work, listening to the sounds of life bleeding back into the house. Leo's footsteps, the crackle of piano keys, Elise's voice drifting down the corridor. She was teaching him to hum the lullaby. Every note struck something old inside me. I watched them from the window once, through the misty morning light. She stood behind him, her hands resting lightly on his shoulders as he played. The boy looked up at her the way I used to look at Julia before everything soured, like she was sunlight. That evening, I went to the lake. The air was thick with fog. I stared at the black water, waiting to feel remorse or maybe peace. Instead, I felt movement. Something stirring just beyond the reflection of the trees. For an instant, I thought I saw 2 figures beneath the surface, a woman in red and another beside her guiding her hand. I didn't tell Elise what I saw. But when I returned to the house, she was waiting in the corridor, pale and trembling. You went to the lake, she said. It wasn't a question. How do you know? She lifted her sleeve. A thin cut ran across her forearm, as though made by glass or stone. Because it woke me, she whispered. That place doesn't sleep quietly. I reached for her before I could think. Her skin was cold. Elise, I said, if you know something, if she told you something that night, tell me now. Her eyes filled with tears. She said she was tired of being your silence. The words pierced like splinters. Julia's voice through Elise's mouth. I tried to save her, Elise continued. But she didn't want saving. She wanted you to look at her once more. To listen. Why come back after all this time? I asked, my throat raw. Because she asked me to. I stepped back. What? She spoke before she went under, Elise said softly. She said, Asterisk, tell him I forgive him when he's ready to hear it. Asterisk, I thought I imagined it. But when your agency called, when they said you needed someone for Leo, I knew it wasn't chance. The corridor seemed to tilt around me. I couldn't decide if I believed her or if grief was finally dissolving what was left of reason. Yet her voice, her eyes, it was all too certain, too haunted. That night, I couldn't stay away. I found her in the music room, sitting at the piano with a single candle burning low. Leo had long since gone to bed. She looked up, startled, but didn't rise. Play, I said. Finish the song. Her hands trembled on the keys. The melody came slow, broken, but beautiful. Halfway through, I moved closer and placed my hand over hers. She didn't pull away. She forgave me, I murmured, but I never forgave myself. Then start there, she whispered. Forgive yourself and speak to your son. He's the one still waiting. The candle burned out between us. In the darkness, I could hear our breathing, the faint echo of the piano, and outside, the lake stirring again. At dawn, I found Leo awake in the nursery, watching the sunrise through the window. I knelt beside him, unsure how to begin. "I am sorry," I said. My voice broke, but the words were real. "For everything. For her. For the years I wasn't here." He blinked, then smiled faintly, the same quiet, knowing smile Julia used to wear. And then, soft as morning, he said, "It's okay, Papa." His voice was small, but it filled the room like music. When I looked up, Elise was standing in the doorway, tears shining on her face. For a second, I thought I saw Julia behind her, then only light. Outside, the first birds began to sing. The house at last was awake. Part 8. The New Language of the Heart. Months passed, and the house no longer felt like a mausoleum. Curtains were open again, windows breathed, and sunlight touched places that had been untouched for years. The staff began to speak freely. Laughter crept back into the halls. Even the clocks ticked louder, as if proud to be heard again. I had thought healing would come like thunder, loud, final, purging. Instead, it came like a shy guest, knocking softly, uncertain if it was welcome. Leo spoke now. Not often, but enough. His words came cautiously, like fragile birds testing their wings. Every sound was a miracle. When he said Papa for the first time in daylight, I had to step outside so he wouldn't see me cry. And Elise, she remained. I had offered her freedom when the school term ended, but she stayed without hesitation. "The boy still needs me," she said. But I think we both knew it wasn't only the boy. One evening in late autumn, I found her standing by the lake, the same place where everything had once ended. The fog was low, curling over the water like smoke. She was staring at her reflection, silent, as if expecting it to speak back. "She doesn't come anymore," I said. Elise turned slowly. "I know. She's at peace now." "How can you be sure?" "Because the water feels warm again." The word should have sounded mad, but I believed her. She smiled faintly and took something from her pocket, a small silver locket. She opened it and held it out to me. Inside was a tiny photo of Julia, younger, laughing, and beside it, a folded scrap of paper. "She left this in the car," Elise said, "the night she died. I kept it until now." My hand shook as I unfolded it. The note was brief. Asterisk, don't let him grow up afraid of your silence. Asterisk. I couldn't speak. "She knew you loved her," Elise whispered. "But she also knew you loved the quiet more. She wanted you to learn how to listen without fear." For the first time, I reached for Elise's hand, not out of guilt or gratitude, but out of something simpler, truer. She didn't flinch. We stood there until the mist lifted and the stars appeared one by one, small lights over still water. For a moment, it felt as if Julia herself had placed them there, proof that endings can still glow. That night, when I tucked Leo into bed, he asked, "Will she come back?" I hesitated, then said, "She never left." He nodded, satisfied, and drifted to sleep. Elise watched from the doorway, arms folded, eyes soft. After he slept, we sat in the library together. The fire burned low, painting the walls in gold and shadow. Elise spoke first. "Do you ever wonder why she chose me?" "All the time," I admitted. "Maybe she knew you wouldn't listen to anyone else." I smiled at that, a rare, real smile. "Then she chose well." Elise leaned back, watching the fire. "You know," she said, "children hear things adults can't. Leo told me he hears music in the walls. I told him it's just the house remembering." "Remembering what?" "That it used to be alive." I didn't answer. I simply reached across the space between us and took her hand again. The world outside was quiet, but not empty. The kind of quiet that breathes, not suffocates. Later, as she rose to leave, I saw something glimmer behind her, the faint outline of a woman's reflection in the glass. For one heartbeat, Julia's face smiled at us both, proud and serene. Then it faded, leaving only candlelight. I didn't chase the vision. Some goodbyes are meant to linger. Now, when I write these words, the house is filled with music again. Not Julia's, not Elisa's, Leo's. The boy who once spoke only in murmurs now sings without fear. And I, Adrian Marchand, the man who thought silence was his only refuge, finally understand what my wife tried to teach me. Love is not quiet. It speaks even after the last word has been said. Tell me in the comments what you think about this story. Did it move you, or maybe it left you wondering what really happened by that lake? And don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Rumor says everyone who does will get something good today. Maybe a message. Maybe a smile. Or maybe that small miracle that's already on its way to you.